In this week's EV news, all new homes in England are to be fitted with electric car chargers at long last. Volkswagen plans to lease used electric vehicles. Home chargers are to be turned off for 9 hours a day to save load on the national grid. Welcome back to another week's EV news. I hope by now you've all entered the competition to win a 10-metre Type 2 charging cable. If not, there's a link in the description for the video where you can do so. The draw will be at the end of this month, so make sure you don't miss out. If you're new here, please click the subscribe button and everybody click like so that the YouTube algorithm can do its thing and put this video in front of as many like-minded people as possible. First up, it's been a long time coming and I hate to think how many homes have been built in the interim without them, but all homes in England are to be built with electric car chargers under proposed new legislation. Let's take a look at this article from The Times. All new homes and offices will feature electric car chargers under new laws designed to address fears over a shortage of plug-in points. The government confirmed today that legislation would be introduced before next year that would require the installation of charging points on all new build homes in England. The legislation, billed as the first of its kind in the world, will also require all chargers to be smart devices that will ensure that batteries can be replenished without overloading the grid. This includes promoting the use of charging overnight. The rules are expected to come in force next year. There are mounting concerns that the plan to phase out petrol and diesel cars risks being undermined by the lack of charging points. The government will ban the sale of new pure petrol and diesel cars by 2030 and hybrids that operate using a combination of battery power and a combustion engine by 2035. The UK has about 25,000 public charging points and government grants have been used to install a further 200,000. The government ran an initial consultation over plans to make domestic charging compulsory 2 years ago, but the policy was delayed by a combination of the general election and the pandemic. In the Commons, Rachel Maclean, the Transport Minister, confirmed today that a formal response to the consultation would be published shortly, adding, "We intend to lay legislation later this year." We have also confirmed our intention to mandate at-home and workplace electric vehicle chargers must be capable of smart charging. The original consultation had a promise to install charging points in every new residential building with an associated car parking space. Existing residential blocks with more than 10 parking spaces would also have to install charging cables running into every parking space whenever they undergo an upgrade. For office blocks, a new charging space will be required for every 5 parking spaces. Changes will be made to existing building regulations to enforce this legislation, which implies only in England as building regulations are a devolved matter. Now, all I've got to say on this matter is get on with it, will you? Get the legislation passed, get these requirements signed and sealed. For far too long now, councils have been half-assing this by setting their own planning requirements around EV charging for new properties. The area I'm currently looking at buying a new building myself stipulates that an outdoor 3-pin socket should be fitted, and I quote, "to enable easier future installation of an EV charging point." Now, that's absolute nonsense, you know that as well as I do, because you just know they'll cable it with the smallest possible cable for a 13 amp socket that they can get away with, and installing a proper charge point will mean having to rip that out, run new cable anyway. So I think the sooner we've got planning regulations that require proper level 2 AC charging to be installed in new properties, the better. Just get on with it, will you? Next up, Volkswagen plans to lease used electric vehicles to people in a move that could have far-reaching consequences for the used car industry. Let's take a look. According to a recent report from Automotive News, Volkswagen will crack an industry barrier by offering its used all-electric ID vehicles for lease. Volkswagen executives recently shared this information with Automotive News, explaining that it's a way for the brand to maintain control over its valuable battery packs. The news came earlier this week directly from VW Group CEO Herbert Diess during talks at the Munich Motor Show. He pointed out that re-leasing the cars will allow the company to put the battery packs to new uses, such as for fast chargers and for home power options. Diess shared via Automotive News the following. "In Europe, we're trying to get a second lease and even a third lease and keep the car in our hands. Battery life we think today is about 1,000 charging cycles and around 350,000 kilometres, it's about 215,000 miles, something like that. So the battery would probably live longer than the car, and we want to get hold of the battery. We don't want to give the battery away." Since EV batteries are expected to last for many years, the battery packs in older used EVs might still be worth a large chunk of change, even after the car itself has depreciated significantly. Moreover, Dice believes an EV battery pack's value could work to keep the car's residual value high, enough that releasing will be an affordable option for people looking for a car. He went on to say that we have already seen EVs holding their value better than petrol or diesel cars. Regardless of the condition of the vehicle, unless it's completely destroyed, there's still a very valuable battery pack inside that can be reused, repurposed or recycled. The CEO of VW Group of America added that the brand is already working to implement this plan. He clarified the residual values could keep VW EVs on the road in various owners' possession for up to 8 years. After that, the cars will be returned to VW so the batteries can be removed and recycled. Now, this is pretty interesting if you ask me. So they're talking about wanting to retain ownership of the battery and wanting to make sure they retain the value of the battery even after the car is no longer viable. But I'm not sure that's the true motive here. If you retain ownership of the car and just take profit from leasing it over and over and over again, you've definitely got a compelling proposition profit-wise as you firmly cement your position as a finance house rather than a car manufacturer, which of course car manufacturers have been moving towards for years and years now. I'm not so sure it's so good for the people that are paying no doubt through the nose to rent an older car though. Let me know what you think in the comments. Would you lease a car that you were the second, third, fourth driver of? I suppose if the monthlies are right, then why not is going to be the response from most people. But who's going to bear the cost and liability of maintenance as these cars get older? I do wonder. Next up, another thinly veiled fear-mongering article about how home chargers are to be turned off for up to 9 hours a day to avoid blackouts. There's a lot of talk about this so-called news at the moment, so I definitely thought it was worth featuring. Electric car charging points in people's homes will be preset to switch off for 9 hours each weekday at times of peak demand because ministers fear blackouts on the national grid. Under regulations that will come into force in May, new chargers in the home and workplace will be automatically set not to function from 8 AM to 11 AM and 4 PM to 10 PM. Public chargers and rapid chargers on motorways and airroads will of course be exempt from that. The government is also taking powers to impose a randomised delay of up to 30 minutes at other times to avoid pressure on the grid if there is a scramble among motorists to recharge the batteries at the same time. There are only 300,000 battery electric vehicles on the UK's roads at the moment, but the energy regulator Ofgem forecasts this could rise to 14 million by 2030 when the petrol or diesel ban kicks in. Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, is worried that millions of drivers will get into the habit of plugging their car in when they return home between 5 PM and 7 PM, putting Britain's electrical grid under stress. From May the 30th, he is ordering that all new chargers at home and in the workplace must be smart chargers, ones that are connected to the internet and power the car battery at times of low demand. They will be set to work only at off-peak times, although the owner will be able to override this default setting. A draft statutory instrument setting out the plans has been lodged with the World Trade Organization by the Department for Transport. It mandates that all charge points at home or in the workplace must incorporate preset default charging hours, which are outside of peak hours. Ofgem estimates that 19 million home charge points will be required by 2035. Industry sources liken the looming problem to daily facing the sort of spike in demand for electricity that occurs during breaks in big sporting events, when millions of viewers open the fridge or make a cup of tea. The record is the 2,800 megawatt surge at the end of the penalty shootout during the 1990 England-West Germany World Cup semi-final, equivalent to boiling 1.12 million kettles. Leighton King, Chief Commercial Officer of Indra, a charger manufacturer, said it was launching a device that rewarded motorists who allowed energy distributors to switch off the charger to protect the national grid, while ensuring the car was ready when they needed it. He said, "If we don't do something different and adapt these smarter ways, we'll come home from school or work, plug in our chargers and the grid will collapse." Early adopters of EVs may either be using a cheap charger without the capability of being switched on remotely by the power supplier at times of low demand, or even using the most basic option of a 3-pin plug socket. Edmund King, AA president and the driver of an EV, said, "Sometimes people need to be nudged to be smart, and this nudge will save them money, as power is cheaper off-peak. The reality is that for most EV drivers with off-street parking, it is more efficient anyway to charge when they sleep. This will help bring cheaper power to electric drivers. This plays right into, if you ask me, this plays right into the hands of the people that bleat on about how the grid couldn't possibly cope when we all switched to electric. And I can't quite believe the government are going ahead with this quite the way they are. National Grid themselves have been very clear that the capacity worries are false news, and stories like this definitely don't do much for EV adoption, do they? Let's be clear though, even if this feature was implemented, it can be overridden. You'll still be able to charge your car whenever you like, 24 hours a day, it just won't be the default option. Absolutely loads of EV drivers currently charge overnight anyway, when demand is low and cheap tariffs like Octopus Go mean you pay hardly anything for what you use. Not being able to charge at 5 PM by default will only be an issue for very, very few drivers, and they can override it anyway. So talk about a storm in a teacup. It's exactly the kind of sensationalist that people love to drone on about though. Well, that's all we've got time for this week. Definitely give me your thoughts on these articles in the comments. I look forward to hearing them. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.